This is Julie Pearson, Little Thunder. Today is December 10th, 2018, and I'm interviewing Gerald Cournoyer for the Oklahoma Native Artist Project, sponsored by Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State University. We're at Bacone University today, where Gerald, you've accepted a job as department chair in art faculty starting in January. You're from Pine Ridge, South Dakota, got your MFA from the University of Oklahoma, and you're known for your colorful, richly patterned and textured paintings that communicate a sense of the spiritual. You've had a number of articles published on your work and several nice videos, and so I hope to cover some new ground today. Thank you for taking time to talk with me.
You're welcome.
Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Wagner, South Dakota, on the Yankton Sioux reservation. My dad is Yankton Sioux, and my mother is Ogallala Sioux. In South Dakota, we register as one tribe. So I'm registered with the Ogallala Sioux tribe. I grew up mostly in Marty, and in the summertime, my parents would travel out to Pine Ridge, and I would spend summertime out there with my relatives, my cousins and grandparents, and ride a horse, ride bike, run through the hills, basically take off all day on horseback, drinking pop and eating sunflower seeds and just going wherever we wanted to go on the horses. That's where I grew up. And little history.
That sounds wonderful. Where were you in this sequence of brothers and sisters?
I'm the youngest of 14.
Oh, okay. Wow. The youngest. They
11 boys and 3 girls.
Yeah.
And my dad had a family of 14. It was 12 boys, 2 girls. And my mother had a family of 10. So 5 boys, 5 girls.
Your folks were pretty mellowed out by the time you grew up. What did they do for a living?
My father was a farmer. He served on tribal council. He was a school board member. And my mother, she started working in the dorms at St. Paul's Indian Mission, is what it was before it became Marty Indian School. Mm. So when my parents met in 1950, my dad was working for the farm project at Marty, and my mother was a clerk typist. So she said she could type 75 words a minute on the old manual typewriter, because that's what they trained for. And she had several different jobs. So she worked in the girls' dorm, and then she became a cook. So she worked in the cafeteria. And every summer they would go to Brookings, South Dakota State University, for 2 weeks, and they would learn how to cook the large recipes instead of for 5 people, you make it for 250 or 300 people.
Yeah, that's because that's an art. What was the creative environment in your home like?
It was crowded. So I don't know if it was creative, but it was crowded. My dad was always working. My mom seemed like she was always working. And then my dad would travel. My brothers would draw things, make their own posters and hang them up. So they'd make the peace sign, and another popular sign that they would make was a 1-finger salute. And so they would make posters like that. They'd put them on their door or on the wall or something. That's basically what I saw at home.
Well, so what is your first memory of seeing Native art, however you would define it?
Walking around the hallway at the boarding school, you would see these posters. And they were from Institute of American Indian Arts. They were from different conferences across the country. Just different things showcasing different programs, social programs on the reservation. So we got to see a lot of those. Different secretaries or people in the school would put them up. So that's what I saw first.
Cool. So what is your first memory of making art?
In first grade, this teacher that we had, he didn't last very long. I think he was only there a year. But we did these small, I guess it was the chalk on black paper. And he wanted us to make a mask. He wanted to make scary faces. And so I remember trying to come up with something for that. But I just remember the black paper with the chalk.
Right, such a contrast. So what kinds of art experiences were available there at the school, at the elementary level, and maybe middle school too?
The elementary level, we had a teacher, my fourth grade teacher, Diane Lawson. She was teaching us to draw boxes and squares and triangles and circles, and then you'd put those together in a sequence, and then it looked like at the end it was supposed to be a dog kind of thing.
Okay, yeah.
And by the time I got to middle school, we had a great, wonderful teacher, Kim Vanderheiden. She came and she really reshaped the art program. So the K-12 art program was really strong, and a lot of good artists came out of that.
Can you name one or two?
Ward Zephyr, Art Standing Cloud, Tracy Wounded Face,
That's cool.
Guy Zephyr, John Zephyr. So we got to see what everybody was doing, and she would put the work up around the school. One of the things that they did, Dave Ripley was another artist that was there, and I remember he let some of the older students paint like album covers, but on a big wall. So the Eagles, the one with the buffalo skull or the cow skull all painted up, somebody reproduced that. So those are the kinds of things that we got to see.
Well, they motivated you.
They motivated, yes.
So how about, when did you start thinking of yourself as an artist?
Well, let me see, probably high school.
And what were your high school art experiences?
It depended on your level of interest. So if you were there just to be in class, you got to do class kind of work. But if you were more serious, I would go before school started. So I'd be up in the art room doing a little bit of painting, do a little drawing. And then at lunchtime, she said, whenever you're done eating, I eat in my office. So if you want to come up here, come on up. So I'd go up there and do a little bit more painting. And then after school, before practice, I would run up there for a few minutes just to try to work on something real fast and then go to practice.
Is this basketball practice or what?
Well, cross country, basketball. Track.
Okay, athletics. Yeah. So I don't think we mentioned the name of this teacher in high school who was important to you.
Kim Vanderheiden.
Oh, that was Kim. Okay,
Kim.
At the high school level. Cool. Yeah. So that's also when you sort of started thinking about art as yourself as an artist. And did you have any ambitions for your artwork yet at that point?
Not really. I wasn't I wasn't thinking I could do this as a career.
Mhm.
I just thought this was something I was interested in. I didn't have any aspirations beyond high school.
So when did you sell your first piece of art?
That was in high school. I sold it to the Princess Pale Moon Foundation out of Washington, D.C. You know who I'm talking about?
Yes.
So I sold that painting for like $250. It's a buffalo painting I saw. Drew it out and painted it. And
Pretty exciting though to sell.
yeah, it was. That was $1 million back
Yes,
then.
yes, at a good price like that, not $25, but $250. So what happened after high school?
I left Marty Indian School and I went to Todd County my senior year.
Okay.
So many teachers and the principal left, and the whole entire feeling of the school. My dad was no longer on the school board. My mother was still working at the kitchen, and my dad and mom said, "We think there's a better school for you." So I went to the Rosewood Reservation, and that's where I finished high school. I was in the art program there, just doing small things. We had a small press. I took pictures for the yearbook. So I was active there. Just a little bit of everything, a little printmaking, little things like that. We made t-shirts, I think, one time. And after high school, before I got out of high school, I joined the Marine Corps.
Okay.
So I didn't know anything about getting into college. So the guidance counselor came in one day and said, who wants to take the SAT test? And I didn't know what that was or what it meant, but everybody was leaving and you have to pay $75. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, I don't have $75, so I'm not going to take it. Mm-hmm. So I joined the Marine Corps to get money for college. And after college, I went to Black Hill State and I was going to be a physical education teacher. I thought I could roll the basketballs out, take attendance, sit in the bleachers, and
you played all those sports.
Played all the sports, so I could blow the whistle, I could coach, wear sweats the rest of my life. That would be living the dream right there.
Just to go back to your Marine service quickly, was it 4 years, and were you in this country the whole time, or
no? I got to travel.
Okay.
I went to my first duty station was Guam.
Oh, okay.
So I went over to Guam for almost a year and a half. And the highest point on Guam, you can get all the way up there and you can look all the way around and there's nothing but water. At the widest point, the island is 4 miles wide. That's at the widest point.
Your first exposure to the sea, probably, like that.
Yes. And it's 33 miles long, but you don't get to use all 33 miles. So most of the island that they use is within, I think we got to travel the whole entire island, stopping and getting something to eat and drink was 4 hours.
So no chance to kind of look at some different kinds of art there, but
no.
Did you do any art while you were in the Marines?
I just drew fast pictures of people, mm-hmm. and they thought it resembled them. That's what they thought. Wow, that resembles me.
So a few portraits.
A few quick portraits, yeah.
So you did go ahead and go to Black Hills State College, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
I was at Black Hill State, and it was
Just
fun.
taking exclusively phys ed stuff?
I became a I became a lifeguard, I guess is what I got out of all my classes. I was taking classes in weightlifting for life and tennis and I think I took a basketball class, and tennis was kind of fun. We got to get out there, and this one girl, all I remember is this young lady would get up there and she's bouncing up and down, and the ball comes over the net and she hits it over the fence. And so we're just standing over there like, wow, she's knocking them out of the park today. And then we have to go get all the balls. But it's when I took a drawing class, because I needed an elective, and that's what it was, an elective. So I took a drawing class, and that's where I thought, can I go into art? Can I change? So I worked there. I mean, I took classes there, and then I left Black Hill State, and I went and worked at St. Joseph's Indian School in the meantime before I got into the Institute of American Indian Arts.
And had you always heard about that? Were you well familiar with their program, or?
Yes, I saw all of the posters out there, and I never really asked, and I never really thought that I could go all the way down there, live in the dorms, and just create until I actually did it. It's almost, to me, it was like when I first learned to swim. I could dog paddle a little bit, but it's having that confidence, and then seeing my brothers and sisters swim out to the raft at North Point Recreational Area in Pickstown, South Dakota. They'd swim out there and get on the raft and dive. And there was a bunch of kids, because they brought the kids on school buses from the surrounding reservation. So I'm just standing there, and I see my classmates from first grade swimming out there. I'm like, I can swim. I can do this. So I slowly made my way out there. It felt like I swam 2 miles, but it's probably 25, 30 yards maybe. But that's what it felt like, leaving the comfort of the reservation and then going down to Santa Fe. It's like taking a big chance, a big leap.
Yeah, it's a big change. So what were your first impressions after you got to Santa Fe?
Everywhere I went, I just really looked at the art. I was so blown away, and I didn't know where to start, really. I didn't know anything about underpainting. I didn't know anything about having drawing skills and making sure you're using the rules of thirds and all of that kind of stuff. And I was just, these guys must be geniuses how they're doing this. You got to see the Fritz shoulder, and I thought, wow, that stuff really sells. And then going into different galleries, and it's all about Native American art, and then you see these non-natives doing Native American art, and they're looking at me, and they're asking where I'm from and what I'm doing. And so I was telling them, and this guy was doing an eagle was coming down, going to get this rabbit, and this guy was doing a photograph of that, or a sculpture, not a photograph, a sculpture. And then you pull one feather from the eagle's tail. So they were asking me what tribe I was, and I told them I was Oglala Sioux tribe from Pine Ridge Reservation. They said, "Oh, that's what the artist is capturing. Do you know what this is?" And I said, "Yeah, I know what that is." And they said, "Can you tell us any more?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to tell you what this is about." I said, "If you're doing it, you should already know." So I walked out of the gallery, but then I started to get the full picture of what it was to be like in Santa Fe.
Yeah, because a lot of cultural appropriation and opportunities, I guess, to speak out or or educate.
I didn't know what cultural appropriation was, but I knew that's what he was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So who were some of the teachers that you most enjoyed at the Institute? And what kind of base did you get?
I can tell you who was there, but well.
And what year should we be talking about? We should probably set that up.
Okay. I got there in 93. So the fall of 93, I had Larry McNeil as my photography. Linda Lomahoff was in 2D design. Felix Vigil was teaching painting. Craig Anderson was teaching painting. Let's see, what other class did I take? I took a lot of drawing classes. And Medina, what was her name? Ada Medina was my drawing instructor. And another lady, I cannot remember her name. I can see her face, but I can't remember her name. The classes I enjoyed the most were probably the 2D design with Linda. And she became my mentor. So I really went to her if I had any questions or problems or advising. And my biggest thing was, all right, I've been here a semester, been here a year, I'm ready to go.
Okay. So, and you're still focused on figurative work. Everything that you're doing is real representational, right?
It was very representational.
Even the 2D stuff.
The 2D stuff, yes. Figure drawing, all of that. Mm-hmm. Because I saw that sort of work selling, and I thought that's the whole key to this thing is to make the sale. Mm-hmm. You gotta sell. So I was trying to do things that the buyers would look at and say, that's what I need in my house, because it talks about the Indian on the horseback or the Indian by the teepee or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's what I was really focusing on. Did you try
to get into the gallery scene yourself over there, or?
No, I thought the gallery scene would come to me. Not knowing anything, I didn't know how that worked, and they weren't teaching that. But I did see the Indian market.
Okay.
So that's where I thought, that's where I need to be. I need to follow that. I need to be in Santa Fe Indian. I didn't know there were more than one.
Markets.
Yeah.
Native markets.
So I thought that was the only one. So how do I get in? And then the just to put your application fee in, it's like $350. Again, that was like $10,000. How do I get that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But they did have a little booth for $50. For the students down at the museum, IAI museum. And so I did a bunch of watercolor, and I had some frames that I found, and that's where I set up. So
good.
So when you make $150 off a little watercolor, it's like, wow, time to celebrate.
So you did pretty well the time that you set up as a student.
I made probably $350, $400 maybe. But back then, that was a lot of money.
Right.
For just making art.
Right. So you're ready to you've done the 2D work, and you're ready to leave Santa Fe. So where do you go next? What happens next?
Well, I did have a lady visit with me from the San Francisco Art Institute. So I was photographing my work using a 35 millimeter, changing my film out and all of that sort of stuff. And this lady came up and she said, I'm recruiting for San Francisco Art Institute. So I said, okay. And we visited a little bit, and then we're just talking process, and we're talking about where I wanted to go with my work and what was my work about, what was I thinking about. And what were my next steps, or have I thought beyond and after an hour and a half of this lady, I wasn't even supposed to talk to her. They had other people. They said, well, since so and so's not around, I'll go find them. You can visit Gerald. So I'm just visiting with her in the small gallery. It's about as big as this room, maybe a little bit bigger. But we're just visiting, and the class starts coming in, and they're having a critique or something, and so they're setting up their work, and I'm trying to get out of there, but she wants to keep talking. So at the end of our conversation, she gave me her card and said, I want to offer you a full ride to San Francisco Art Institute, which I didn't take. Instead, I went to Durango, Colorado, Fort Lewis College, because that was free.
Was there anybody else from the Institute going over there, or did you just happen to?
I was married to a young lady, and we split. We got divorced, but that was the reason why we went to Fort Lewis, because it was closer to her home down in Santa Fe. It didn't work out. And then I went to the University of South Dakota. So now we're 1996.
So at Fort Lewis, though, are you in Durango? Are you taking art classes again?
I was. I wanted to be an art teacher.
Okay.
So I thought, well, I'm not going to be a coach. I could be an art teacher and still coach instead of a PE teacher. So I thought, well, I could coach and teach art. And then I went to University of South Dakota with that in mind. So I get into the education department, and I'm going along, and then at some point I decide, I think 97, I think I wanted to go into art. So I'm doing little art shows. I did an art show in Sioux Falls, the Northern Plains Tribal Arts Market. So I had a painting. I had 4 or 5 paintings, didn't know what it was going to be like. And so I just had a table. I leaned up a couple of paintings against the table because they were larger. And then I had smaller paintings and drawings just on top of the table. And this guy was walking back and forth. He's doing this number. He's looking at the painting, shaking his head, and walking around different angles. And he's kneeling down, looking at the painting, doing this. And he came over and he said, how much you want for this painting right here? And I said, $500. Well, I don't know, $500. That's a lot of money. I could do $350. I'm not coming back tomorrow doing $350. That's what I can do. So he walks away. And when he walked away, someone came over to me and said, you know who that is? I said, no, Larry Pearson. He's a federal court judge here in Sioux Falls. I said, yeah. You got to get in his collection. I said, what do you want for this painting? He said, $500. What is he offering? $350. Yeah, just do it. So I ended up selling a painting for $350 to this guy with money, of course. And then I see him about 10 years later after I get my MFA. I run into him. He said, I saw that you're having a show here in Rapid City, so I wanted to come and check it out. So he said, a lot different than what you did before. I said, yeah, it's a lot different. He said, you know, that painting, I shipped it down to my summer home in Florida. So I go down there and I spend time in Florida. Winter time, I'm down there more. So I changed out all the windows in my house. It's early in the morning. So I have the paintings right in my bedroom in the hallway. So when I leave my bedroom door open, so the sun comes in, hits that painting. It's so beautiful. That's what I wake up to every day. It's like, man, you couldn't do 500, huh?
Yeah.
felt like he took me on that one.
Thank you for sharing that story. It happens to a lot of artists. Yeah, so you eventually get your BFA at University of South Dakota, still kind of focusing on representational work, right?
Yes, really got caught up in the portrait series with Fritz Shoulder and Malcolm Furlow, kind of with the very colorful and very splashy. So I was really doing a lot of that. I took second place out at Red Cloud Indian Art Show, and then I won an award up at Northern Plains that year. So I think that year I made like $5,000 at Northern Plains. So that, man, I'm taking off. Yeah.
I was interested to read that you also got a degree in interdisciplinary studies while you were at South Dakota. Is that right?
Yes, I got a master's. Basically, I was applying to all of these MFA programs. I wanted to stay close to South Dakota. University of South Dakota does have a program, but they told me we never allow any of our undergraduates to come into our MFA program. It's never happened. So when I was in my interdisciplinary studies, this person I graduated with, she graduated with the BFA just like I did, in painting just like I did. And she's walking in and saying, I'm a graduate assistant and I'm getting my MFA in painting. I said, from here? And she said, yes. I said, oh, I thought they didn't do that. She said, no, they do that all the time. So
what was behind that, do you think?
Because I painted what I painted, figurative, Native American. I did tell the painting professor when I first got there, he was talking about I painted a large 5-foot by 6-foot painting, and these guys were in the purification lodge, sweat lodge. They're all sitting in there, and you can see figures in the back, and they're kind of real dark. And when I painted it, I had something very particular in mind because we went to the sweat lodge that night, and one of the Native American studies professors had passed away. And he had been on campus for 25, 30 years and was a big part of the Native community. I didn't meet him, but I heard a lot about him, and we were in the ceremony that night. We were praying for him, and there was a lot of things happening. People were very emotional, and when we came out, I see these 2 stars, shooting stars, and one goes by, and a little while later, well, that one is still burning out, another one comes by. So that's what I painted. And the professor was talking about something way out of left field about, this is a Native American ceremony, and it's going on and on. And he said, that's what you painted, right? And I said, no. And a few of my classmates were like, hey, wow, new guy stuck up for himself. Go, new guy. They didn't know who I was, but years later we talked about it, and they're saying, yeah, nobody ever did that to that guy before. So that kind of started the bad blood there, that I didn't agree with
his interpretation
of anything Native American. So he was trying to have me do storyboards and all of this other stuff, and talking about these legends and different things. And I said, that's not what I'm doing. And he didn't like that. So each time I did something, he didn't like it.
Well, you found your way to University of Oklahoma at some point in their MFA program, right?
Yes.
How did that happen?
I met a girl that I married, so now she's my wife. But we were working the same program, and she was going to be working in Pine Ridge, which she did, and I was going to take a job in Rosebud. But things fell through. I didn't take the job, and a couple months later, I ended up at Porcupine year-round school. I was working security, doing the cameras, and in school suspension, and then they would pull me in to teach art classes. So there I was doing things with the kids. We were starting to do a little bit of painting. We were starting to do a little bit more than just a worksheet. And then I think around Thanksgiving, just this first grade class, I brought them in, and we made those little vests out of paper sacks. I thought, well, it was something I did when I was a kid. So that's what we did. We made those little vests, and they designed them, and we cut the fringe, and so everybody was kind of like, wow,
enjoyed that.
Cool. Yeah. And then working in school suspension, and that's when I realized that a lot of our Indian children could not read. So we had these real tough guys that were always in trouble, the Chlete boys. Chlete means you're kind of naughty. So these kids would come in and they would sit next to me because they would be bothering other students that were in there. So I said, you're going to sit next to me and I want you to read to me. So bring your books out. The 7th and 8th grade boys bring out this 3rd grade book, and they were reading really slow, and I would listen to them, and we'd go through the whole book, and they would get stuck on a word, and I'd say, let's sound it out. So we would sound out words. And when I was sitting there, I thought, man, this is a problem. It's probably an epidemic that a lot of our kids that are acting out are doing so out of frustration because they can't read. If you're reading at a 2nd or 3rd grade level and you're in 7th grade, 8th grade, you can't possibly read and understand a simple science experiment in class. So we would sit and read, and then I would put paper on the table and I'd put pencils and colored pencils out. Then after reading for a while, we would draw, and then I'd have to go get their meals. And every day those kids would be, then some days they'd try to wrestle. So right outside the door is the principal's office. And it's like, she'd come over and say, what are you guys doing? I'm the only one in here, so I had to go get the lunch and come back. And in the meantime, these kids are wrestling. So they could have gave me, some kind of card or something to put all the meals on. But so I'm making several trips, and kids are wrestling, and people are looking at me like, hey, you better take care of that. None of you could have came in here and say, all right, kids, you're not wrestling on the floor. So I knew I wasn't going to do that job forever. And my wife said, let's move down to Norman. I'm going to get a master's in educational administration, and then you can get into the art program. I said, all right. So we did that, and I took a year. I just took special courses. So I just took 2 painting classes with George Hughes. And he was looking at my work, and he said, it's very figurative. I said, yeah, a lot of portrait, yes. And he said, what do you want to do? So I just want to paint, make some money at it. He said, but what do you want to say? What does your artwork, what do you want to say with this? Or is that it? Just pretty pictures? So I said, well, I'm just trying to make money. That was kind of my thing. And we laughed about it. He said, but you can do more. You can do more. So after I got in the program, he was going through my portfolio, and he said, let's select these pieces. We'll get them photographed, and then we will put them in your or portfolio. So whenever they do reviews, he said, it'll be there. He said, I'll pick your strongest work. So we spent that year just working on all of these paintings and doing different things. And he had me reading and researching. And so it was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get in, and then I wasn't too sure what I was going to do. But I needed to be doing something. So I found this door I painted on, and different things. It was hardware, experimenting, and different people had come in. So Jim Wade came in that year, and he had some what I liked about his work was very textural, very colorful. And I thought, man, that's really some good work there. And it was large.
Mm.
So I liked what Jim Wade was doing. And I learned to stretch, make, and stretch paint. So using Cal Tint or Quick Flash that you get at a paint store.
Mm-hmm.
And then you bring that back to the studio, and you take methacellulose, and they call it, I guess it was called Rollex, and you mix those together. So methacellulose is a powder, and the way it was explained to me by George Bogart was you take 2 film containers full, and you have a gallon, and then you just a gallon in a bowl, and he said then you take a mixer for like cake mixing. He said you just mix that up for about 15 minutes, 10 minutes, and he said mix it up real good, and so you can turn it upside down, and it won't come out. So I did that, and then he said, no, just take some of that. He said put it in a Tupperware container. He said, no, let's mix this paint in there. So we used the Cal Tint and a spatula. We were mixing it up, and he said, there it is. And then let's mix another color. So that's what I was doing. And he said, you can get some nice textures with this. So we're making textures, and he was down at the other end of the hall painting, and I was in my little studio painting. And he would always come down and say, you're the only one that's ever here. Let's see what you got.
And you were getting that 2-dimensional effect almost too with the texture on the canvas.
Yeah.
Working in depth.
So I was trying all these different tools, and that's what some of the faculty hated, was all these people come in here and they have all these different things, and they teach all these different methods, and our students think they have to do this stuff. And so, God, I just hate that. And so I was listening to them complain about that.
So he wasn't as appreciated by the other faculty, is what you're saying. He wasn't.
George Bogart.
Yeah.
He was emeritus status, I think, and he was just down at the other end of the hall. He always had a space as long as when he retired. I think that was part of his retirement package. He said, I'll retire if you give me a place to paint. So they give him a place to paint. Like, all right.
Were there any other Native students in the MFA program when you were there?
Marwin
Bacone.
Matt Jarvis.
Okay.
Matt Jarvis was graduating. I was in the middle. Marwin started. Tony Tiger.
Okay.
And I was trying to think if there were any others. But I think that was it.
Yeah. So now you kind of cut the strings to figurative work, real representational work. Have you done that completely, or are you just involved in textures and colors right now? And
well, what I've done, and I was doing all these large works because they were 5 foot by 6 foot, a lot of movement,
right,
a lot of color representation. And one of my students, because I was teaching now, after I graduated, I was teaching full time when George Hughes left, so they needed me for that year.
Oh, so you taught at OU in the program after
Mhm.
George Hughes left. Okay.
And one of the students was talking about her mother having a cancer.
Mm.
And she said that she said, I started doing this research on color and how that heals. So she was saying these colors, if you wear these colors, there's this theory. So she was showing me all these books. So I thought that was very interesting, where you take fabric and you're putting them together to heal yourself. So I thought that was really interesting because I never had come at it from that angle. What my work was about then, when George asked me about, the way he put it was, let's enhance what you already know. No one's ever said that. No one's ever said, you have great skill, let's enhance it. And George did. And he said, you have to be very strong in your drawing abilities. So that's what I focused on. And he said, okay, now let's look at what you want to paint about. He said, all of these things you could paint about in your Native American heritage, but he said, what is the one thing that stands out to you? And I said, spirituality. He said, okay, let's expand on spirituality. So we started talking about color, and that's where the color came in. We started talking about repetition of pattern. So over and over and over and over, you see all these patterns, and you say, what should we be learning from these patterns? I said, it's like anything you're doing. I said, spiritual enlightenment. Mm-hmm. So I talked about the more you sing a song when you're crying for a vision, you're on a humlecha, you keep singing the same prayer song over and over and over for spiritual enlightenment. So I said, okay, that's good. We can use that. And then what else? So we talked about different ceremonials. And I have this painting. It's a 4 foot by 5 foot painting, and it's all black. Except there's a portion, and it looks like a big red circle. But it's not so red because I used some black and on a rag, and I made it duller. And in the center, I have yellows and oranges and reds and a little bit of white. And then the white part, I used that rag with a little bit of black paint, so it looks gray. And I had a show in South Dakota, and I took that one with me. And that's the only one that didn't make it into the show. So I have all these other colorful paintings, and then that one there didn't make it into the show, and they had an easel and we had a panel. So I put it up behind me, and all of these Native artists were talking about the artwork. And they said, we can kind of see what you're doing in the other room, but this one behind you, that's not Native at all. It's just a big circle, kind of a target. So I was just sitting there listening and shaking my head. And I said, how many of you have ever gone into a inipi, a sweat lodge, a purification lodge? So everybody's raising their hand. And I said, okay. So when you pass around the pipe, the chanunpa, is that in the sweat lodge, or are you standing around outside? Some, inside, some outside. So I said, is it done during the day or at night? They all said at night. I said, okay. So as you're passing that pipe around and you light that pipe for someone, I said, what do you see? And finally somebody said, we see that right there. And I said, yeah, that's what you see. And I said, and that's why I painted that. And I said, it took you a long time to get there, but you finally got there. And so someone said, is that what all your paintings are about? And I said, yeah. It's about a ceremonial experience. And then a few people were like, I'm going to have to go look at all the other works now, because now that gave them something more to go on.
Yes.
And I said, I was thinking, that's in my artist statement that's hanging on the wall.
So they hadn't read that part.
Nobody read that. They just went right in.
That's so interesting. That's a great story. You know, this kind of reminds me too that for a while I was wanting to talk to you about the Urban Indian Five and how, you know, thinking in terms of healing powers of color, and then your focus here is on communicating spirituality already, I think, before you got involved with them.
Mm-hmm.
But do you remember when you did get involved and how that conversation came about?
I was invited over to Harold Bars's house, and Steve was doing the Red Feather Gala, and he came and asked me if he could have a piece for the Red Feather. I was like, yeah. And I gave him a piece, and I thought at least $500 to $1,000 I'd get something for the piece, and I'd get a small check. Right. So he did bring me a check for, I think it was like $250. Brought me a check for $250, and then he was giving out these checks for $7 and $12 and $22, and we were just sitting there talking. And he said, "You know, we need to do something more with this Red Feather Gala." I said, "Why don't you put out a magazine? You work right at that clinic up there. You should put out a magazine and you should promote it, you know, like a little gallery space, if you have space up there available. And if you really thought about it, you could go into like the Kiowa 5. This could be a launching point." And so Steve was just thinking, and then he said, "Well, maybe that's something we could do." So we had a long conversation, and then I tried to get Tony Tiger and Marwin, and then I got Brent Greenwood interested. So Brent and I we went up to the clinic, and Rita Brokalter, whatever her name was, she was sitting there, and someone came in and said, "We have a couple of artists that want to visit with you," because she was administration. So she said, "All right." So she said, I grabbed a couple of 20s because I thought, well, I'll buy some art today. So she came in and she sat down, and we started talking about the idea of getting 5 artists together to put some artwork in the clinics. Mm-hmm. We could start with this clinic, and we can kind of ripple out, and so we presented that. She was like, "You know, I thought you guys were just coming in here to sell some," and I didn't want, you know, she was thinking she was going to buy some trinkets and beads and whatever. And he said, "No, we're beyond that." And so I think that's where Tony Tiger said, "I'm not going to have them think of my work in that manner, so I'm out." So that was okay. Mm-hmm. We needed to have that conversation. Mm-hmm. And then once we started to define what direction we wanted to go, that's when things started getting more and more. So Tom Pula, myself, Marwin, we got Shan involved, Kim Rodriguez, different people. So people came and kind of went in that group. And then it was Brent Greenwood, Tom Pula, myself. We got Shan, who was a big supporter, and then Holly Wilson. Mm-hmm. So I went and visited everybody at their place, and Holly was like, "Well, I'm really not doing nothing right now." And so I said, "Well, you should come and think about joining the group." Shan was eager, so she was like, "I want to be part of this."
Shan Gosshorn,
yeah,
lost, yeah.
And so Holly was like, "Maybe, I don't know. I'm not doing anything at that point." So we said, "Well, you can do a little bit of something." So she came and she started getting into it and getting back into her own work. And so it was
that
good.
Kind of launched her into creating again.
Mm-hmm. And she said she hadn't been working seriously, but she had been doing a few things here and there. But this gave her an opportunity.
And were the works that were on display, they're there for people to take in as they're there, but were they also for sale, or were they just there for
They were
healing
for
purposes?
they were for sale, and what actually happened was the patients that were going into the mental health side, one of their assignments was just walk through the gallery and see if there's something that you can see. Just observe
Right.
art, and if there's something that sort of catches your eye or makes you think, write about it. So they would walk through with pencil and paper, and they'd be really looking at every part of the artworks. So they start writing things down, what and why and how that made them feel. So they're documenting all these things. And that's when we started talking about this art of healing.
Yeah.
So going back to that color, that theory of healing with color. So that became very important.
And you've talked a little bit about the significance of the color red for you, and I was wondering too how much, and I'll have you share that, if you will, with the in the interview, but also wondering how much of the traditional, I don't know if it's red, black, white, and yellow, but if you use very much of that traditional symbolism, Lakota symbolism of color in your work.
So when I use the color red, I'm referencing the blood of the people. So when we're at the Sundance and we're giving flesh, we're offering the flesh, and with that comes the blood of the people. So you're doing that. You're offering your flesh and blood for people in the community that are sick, that are having a hard time with the loss of a loved one, those sorts of things. So I did my research, and a lot of cultures around the world associate red with power. Red is associated with spirituality. Red is associated with all of that stuff. It's all about being closer to the Creator. So they talk about the red tie, the red power tie. So it has a connotation of power. When we go to get our tobacco that we use in our ceremonial pipe at Chanunpa, we go gather red willow. And so you peel the red off, and then there's a layer. So it's an off-white layer, and you peel that off. Then you get down to a white layer, and that's what you're using inside your pipe. So that's what you put in the pipe. It's got to be dried out, and then you can cut it up a little bit because it will come off in big pieces. So you just cut that up. That's the only thing we use in the ceremonial pipe. So people talk about tobaccos and kanik and all that kind of stuff, but we just use red willow. They use willow in the making of aspirin, so it does have some medicinal purposes there. But that red, when you do something, if you're praying at a certain time of the month, and you pray, and they say a waluta. So you make this big tobacco tie, and you tie it in a red cloth, and you would hang that up. At a certain time of the month, you would make a waluta. For during ceremony, you might be asked to make a waluta. But that's why that red, those are some of the reasons why that red is very important. When we do something and we pull out that ceremonial pipe, that catlinite, that red pipestone is the blood of the people. So that goes back to another great flood legend, where this is how the blood of the people was used to make this catlinite. So was during the Great Flood. People were drowning. Then all the bodies kind of washed into a ravine. And as the waters receded, the bodies were piling up. But as water was going down, the bodies would go back and forth and cut open. And then all of this blood was left in this ravine. And today it's Pipestone, Minnesota. And that's where that legend comes from. It's the blood of our ancestors. So we even talk about that color red. We talk about the bones of our ancestors. So we say grandfathers whenever you're bringing those heated stones into the sweat lodge. So those bones are your ancestors, and you're reheating them up. You're giving them another life. So as you bring them in, you're touching the blood of the people that piece of candlelight to those bones of your ancestors. So you touch those first 7. And that goes back to the ceremonials, the 7 different ceremonies that we have. So all of this just keeps going and going and going. So the more that you get into this, the more you're thinking about, wow, that when you offer tobacco, it makes sense when you're offering this tobacco. Before you do anything, you're offering some tobacco. So long ago, we had tobacco as a barter or trade. And if you had a handful of tobacco, you can trade for 5 of the best horses in the land. And it was a great sacrifice. It was currency. And now people still bring you tobacco. When they do something with you, they'll bring you tobacco. So whenever you pour water at a inipi, someone will bring you some tobacco. It's a sacrifice. So when you make your chaliwa pachta, your tobacco ties, or your wonye, your flags for sunnets, you're putting tobacco in it as a symbolic gesture. So we still use that. So when someone comes to you and they're going to ask you for something, they offer you some tobacco. And that's when you know, oh, something's about to happen here. So we still use that.
Do it now.
So it's a binding thing.
Well, and you've explained in some of your videos how important, this is the way you live, and how important, for example, you'll smudge off and smudge your paintings off, and how that's just an integral part of your painting process. So your artistic practice is really literally grounded in the spiritual, as well as, seeking to convey that to people. I'm wondering what you also think about Native activism and Native art, and I was just wondering about your thoughts on that.
Native activism, like
sort of political, because you seem to stay away from any really overt political statements because your focus is on the spiritual. Not what I've seen anyway. I haven't seen a lot of.
You haven't seen any angry paintings.
But at the same time, it's kind of like, as a Native person, you're already politically engaged, whether you want to be or not, just because of the way the history plays out. But I just didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, or.
Well, one person could get lost in the political, always active. When I think of that, I think of Edgar's work, because there's a lot of anger that comes with and it's just words. It's just words. When he did that show in Minneapolis, and they destroyed a lot of his signs. Right. But they're signs, and they're out there in the public, and so people took baseball bats to them or tore them down or whatever. That's not all that he does. but that's what he's known for. And his other works are more colorful, and there's a movement to them. And he was telling us about it, that he was snorkeling and he saw these fish, this school of fish going by, all these different colors. And so that's what really inspired him at some point in his graduate school. And then as he progressed in his career, he got spiritual with those pieces that look like a tree that go into a Y. And then he went to the sign. So he's just listening for words, a word that'll stick out to him. And then he'll put that down, and then so he's painting with word and different colors. And so he's just thinking of ways to put these words together. Mm-hmm. So it's like a poetry kind of, I think that's what he's doing. But the words that he chooses, they could lead one to think that he's very politically active. And he's making a statement on some social whatever. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of what I saw out of his work. Mm-hmm. What I wanted to do, or what I try to do in my work, is we always talk about teaching the next generation. I was reading these applications for a grant, and some young lady in her late 20s, early 30s was talking about, I don't know why Indian people even move to the city, how can they afford to live in Denver, or how can they afford to live out in LA and Detroit. And so she's talking about all of these places where people were sent on relocation in the 1950s. I was thinking, wow, you really need to know some more about what was happening. So I think the next generation needs to realize that there were some things that happened and why people moved from one place to the next. And it wasn't because they could afford it. It was because it was a program. And that a lot of their relatives are still out there. So a lot of my dad's brothers were involved in relocation. So they were in and around Chicago. And when I listened to different stories people talked about, they knew Indians were in the neighborhood because someone would pull out a drum and start singing. And then pretty soon there's a couple more people that joined and like, hey, I didn't know you were out here. So from boarding school, and then you end up in relocation programs.
Well, in terms of passing on some knowledge to the next generations, you have taken on this challenge of being the chair of the department and faculty here at Bacone now, beginning next semester, I understand it.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about just some of the goals, I guess, of the program at this point? And
you're looking at the entire art department right now. So we're starting slow with offering just a couple of courses just to get started. There is no several sections. There's just going to be one section of drawing and two sections of art fundamentals and a painting class.
Okay.
Just to give people an idea of what's here. And then as we go forward, that gives us the summer to start defining what this program could or should be. So I envision this program to be a strong 60-hour program, an associate degree that the student can graduate with an associate and matriculate into a BFA program somewhere, or maybe even change majors. But the main part is to get a strong, solid foundation in the art and associate in art. When I left IAIA, I wanted to learn how to draw better because I felt like that was really weak. Over the years of teaching, I really got into perspective. So a lot of the work that I was doing with my students was all about 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 5 point perspective, just to show that they can have success using a ruler. And then once they get that confidence, then you start introducing value and you start introducing positive, negative space. So the students are starting to see where those go, how they fit together. Then we start using that rule of thirds, and then the students are like, wow, I can really do this. And so some of them will change from, I was going to be a history major and I took this art class. I was like, wow, I really learned a lot. And then they'll change their major, whatever.
Right. You win them over and you have both those backgrounds of, figurative and then this more abstract, kind of expressionistic approach.
Yes.
So in terms of just getting into your process a little bit more, what size format do you most often work in when you're doing acrylics on canvas? Or are you just working in all sizes? Are you medium scale, or are you working big quite a bit, or does it just depend?
Wall space has the wall space has shrunk.
Collector's wall space is so strong.
They're no longer going for large paintings. Now they want smaller paintings. So you're probably, I would say, in the 30 by 40 range, all the way down to, I have a couple 4-inch by 4-inch paintings.
Well, one of the videos, it was great. I was surprised to see you were in a white lab coat and you were painting, and I thought, well, that makes perfect sense as close up as you are to these huge, paintings. Do you still, if you paint big, do you like to do that to protect your clothes? Or
I do. I didn't wear I never think about putting on one of those aprons and tying it in the back. And I see all these other guys walking around like that. And I bought these really nice Brooks Brothers shirts. They're the polos. And we were doing ink. And so one of the students went, shh, and just splattered on my shirt. I was like, oh man, could have used an apron
I needed my lab coat on.
Yeah, that's why.
Well, and another thing I really like about your process that you said in previous interviews is that there's all this intellectual effort. There's all this thinking that goes into your work. And so I'm wondering what comes first for you. Is it like the emotion associated with a spiritual event or ceremony, or is it the thought behind it? What comes first, emotion or thought?
Well, at one point I was just doing thumbnail sketches on the wall with the vine charcoal, and taking these patterns and then putting these patterns and trying to create these intricate patterns as I was thinking. So this bird pattern, it was a geometric pattern that I'd come across. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So I wanted to create this geometric bird pattern, and that would have a geometric echo. So one side would reflect the other side, and then how do I connect these two? So I'm really thinking and drawing and then getting ideas and putting more paint on, using that drywall trowel, and I made this great big one. So pulling the paint across the canvas, and then working on 4 or 5 at the same time. So I have that one, which helped me go into this one, which helped me go into the next one and the next one. And so when I was at OU as a grad student, I would create 10 5-foot by 6-foot paintings, and I would be pulling on the back and then stapling. And so I knew when to quit. It was when all of this area right here was all bleeding and raw. It's like, okay, I'm done. Let it heal, and then I would do 10 more.
Yeah, because, and you explained that too, that you, are you kind of, you're just working through the problem in a way till you get to this place where you feel like everything's resolved, or you're just following that impulse through all the way?
I'm just following the impulse.
Yeah. As long as your hands hold it.
Yeah.
And that's neat. I mean, because there is something about a series, right?
Mm-hmm.
That has a whole story and a context to it.
So that one idea in the series, and then you really do a lot. You work a lot on this one.
Right.
The next gets less work, and less, and so less becomes more.
Okay. Yeah, that's neat. That's neat. By the time you're at the end of it, you've refined it almost like a piece of calligraphy or something. It's just simplified. Do you do any commission work?
Those are harder to do because someone's idea, they'll give it to you and say, I want you to paint my brother-in-law on this painting right here. This, the way you did this so abstractly, and it looks like my brother-in-law. And I don't know what your brother-in-law looks like, and how do I put your brother-in-law in there? And then, so I like this, and so we worked on an idea one time. And I was like, yeah, how about this? And then add some of this. I was doing that, sending him photographs back and forth, and pretty soon he said, well, that's not what I wanted. So I learned my lesson.
Yeah, I think a lot of artists feel that way. We're going to be looking at your paintings in a few minutes too, but can you talk about, you do acrylics, and then you do, I think you called them glass acrylics, I can't remember. It's just kind of a glassy.
From glass.
From glass, okay. Acrylic canvas on glass. Can you explain to us what you're talking about with that?
This is what Gene Babinger did at University of Oklahoma years ago. So he took this heavy gel medium and he put it on a glass surface and then let it dry. And then on the back side of it, you're painting. So you're putting color in.
Okay.
And it's layer after layer. So after you put a color in, you need to let it completely dry, and then you'll put some more medium over the back of that so you don't scratch or do anything to that next layer. So they become these very thick paintings, but they're very, very shiny, shimmery, and they're very flat on the front of them. But you could have a lot of things happening in your work when you do it that way.
Yeah, I looked at a few on your website. I don't think we have any examples today, but they were, really, they have a great feeling of a mystical feeling, and just some neat effects that you get with those.
That one's behind you.
Okay, good. We get to. Well, I noticed the sheen, so we will get to see one. So how about your signature? How do you handle that?
On the back.
You put it on the back, okay. And you've kind of taken us through, is your creative process, how does that work? When you get an idea, from the time you get an idea, will you get up in the middle of the night and work? Or
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Not with this new job.
Middle of the night, I'm still trying to catch up on sleep.
Right. But once you get an idea, what happens? What's the next?
Doing thumbnail sketches.
Okay.
And then placing that using rule of thirds. as an artist, after a while, you forget about rule of thirds and you're just doing it automatically.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to my drawing skill.
Mm-hmm.
So teaching drawing for the last 5 years in DC really helped my skill
In Washington,
in
D.C.
Washington, DC.
Oh, okay. Because you left Oklahoma for about 10 years,
10
and then
years.
you have just come back. But 5 of those years you were in D.C.
Yes.
Oh,
Went back to South Dakota to teach at our tribal college, Oglala Lakota College on the Pine Ridge Reservation.
oh, neat.
Started a program there. And then just before I left, I took 4 students to National Portfolio Day in Denver. So out of that, 2 students, one was was pre-admitted to Chicago Art Institute, and one was pre-admitted to Minneapolis Art Institute. So I thought that was pretty good for a small little program.
Pretty
on the
proud,
reservation.
yes. Well, I hope you are going to have the opportunity not only to be a great teacher to a lot of these students here at Bacone, but also to continue a lot of your painting. And I'm wondering, so far, as you look back on things, what's been a big highlight for you in terms of your painting career?
Let me see. I was going to so I did a painting. When I got to South Dakota, I was still involved in all the art shows. I was involved in the governor's show, and then there was a show in Nebraska, and this Synergy was the juror,
Mm-hmm.
and I took first place.
Oh,
And it was a northern and southern plains show. So all of the big northern and southern plains people had their works in there, and I took first place, and that came with $1,000. So I thought that was pretty good. They gave me a certificate. I have that at home. I was going to bring that in the painting, and of course I didn't.
That's all right, but yeah, what a neat that's neat to in that kind of company win that top award. So looking back, what's been kind of a low point so far?
I guess being I was a part of an art show in South Dakota, and everybody wants a print of a ledger, or they want a print of an Indian on a horseback.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not appealing to me, but that's what people love.
Mm-hmm.
And it's their taste, and you can't change that. So I guess I always talk about ice fishing when I go to those shows, because you're waiting on a nibble, and you start reeling it in, and then it's like the dog seeing a squirrel. Going on to the next move.
Well, you have mentioned that you prefer, kind of working with the galleries now as opposed to trying to do the shows.
Yeah.
I know. That's,
There's an expectation that if your work isn't overtly Native American with Native American theme, we're still living in 1880 according to our art shows. And there's no way around that unless the buying public sees us as something more. And that's where my work is at, is we still ride horse, but we're not chasing buffalo. We're just riding horse to ride horse now. Mm-hmm. We powwow and we do our ceremonials, but it's taboo to paint about your ceremonials. Mm-hmm. And who paints about our ceremonials is the non-Indian.
Yeah. Right.
And you can't tell the younger generation, you can't teach that. They have to find it on their own. That we are more than what happened in 1868 or 1820. We're no longer nomadic. Now we're living in some place, and we no longer have to chase the buffalo for us to eat. Now we have to get college educated and learn how to adapt and adjust to the new changes. I taught a class, and it was about music and culture. So on the reservation, I talked about the culture and how it had changed. I said, once we became sedentary on the reservation, we started to get heavy because we were eating cow instead of buffalo or elk or deer. Then we started getting these heart diseases, and then we started getting diabetes because they introduced the flour and the sugar and the different kind of meat. Now we're eating bacon. So I said it really changed. You're eating a diet that was created for the cavalryman. Beans and bacon and flour and hardtack and some cow meat. So we don't walk like we should. We don't do things like we should anymore. And even ceremonially, when we're in ceremony, we have to realize that if we're going to be fasting, so if you're drinking 2 monsters a day for years, now you're down to no monsters, that affects your body. Or 4 or 5 full strength pops, that affects you in a way. So there's all of these little things that happen, and then people are like, well, you got to be more strict, and you got to be more prepared. But we don't live 150, 200 years ago. And even the sun has changed with the ozone layer, so that sun is hotter.
Yeah, and that's been a real thing at ceremony for older people. Those changes. Well, I thought that was very well expressed about the education that needs to happen through Native artists today. And so now we'll take a look at a couple of your paintings, if that's all right.
Okay.
Okay, do you want to tell us about this piece, Gerald?
I did several of these. And it was part of a series. So this is the Window Series Yellow, and that's what they were called, Window Series.
Oh, cool.
And I did one with red, yellow, black, white.
Oh, wow.
I did a blue one and a brown one and a green one.
Were the backgrounds different each time with the...
Well, I kept those.
The blue? Okay.
Those leaves in there.
And
I changed the color. So where it's yellow, it would have been red. Where it's yellow, it would have been white.
Yeah, cool.
Then I put different birds in there. And so the process was to get the gel medium on the glass.
Right.
And once it's on the glass and once it's set up, then I started figuring out where I wanted to put my window. And then when I did the window, I used color on a drywall trowel, and I just pulled it through. The bird was in there. Looks like a crosshair, but the bird was in there. And then I did the background in the blue, and then you go around and do the yellow. I guess the leaves first and then yellow behind it. So
Right.
After you do everything, you have to put more gel medium on. You got to let that dry. And so I had these floor dryers, those round, those circular ones. Like you're drying the carpet.
Yeah.
I have those. So I have those going.
Oh, wow.
It's a whole process.
A whole process, yeah. It's such a neat effect, and you can see the underpainting, and yeah.
And then after I did yellow, then I did a white, and then after the white, I did some black behind it to keep everything from bleeding through.
Right. Right.
So I airbrushed those
Oh,
leaves.
the leaves. Okay, yeah. Cool.
And the messenger. So I always talked about the messenger.
Mm-hmm.
Goes back to ghost dance. When they were dancing, they went into a trance, and from that trance, the dancers were able to communicate with their deceased relatives. So that's still going on. When I was in Pine Ridge, I was living in Kyle, and I was driving from my house to drop off some leaves. So all morning I was raking leaves around our house, and this crow raven came and landed in the tree. It just was there all morning. And I was raking the leaves, and my wife said, "What's your friend got to tell you today?" And we laughed about it. And then I drive out and I drop all the leaves off. And as I'm leaving, I noticed my tires seemed to be going lower. I saw a nail in it. So I drove to my friend's house, and I had to go down this little dirt road to get to his place. He fixed it, and I had to run back to the house to get some more money to give him. And so I'm leaving my house because I was in a hurry. So I got to the door and I was about ready to go out, and my wife said, "Well, what are we going to have for supper?" So I turned around and we started having a conversation. So I get back in the truck. Took about 2 minutes to get in the truck, and I drive back. And as I'm driving down this dirt road, all of a sudden I see all this dust in the air. And as it's dissipating from the left to the right, I'm going around this little corner, this turn, and I'm just watching it. And then I see 2 bodies in the ditch, and I see a car just rolling. And then there's 2 people in that car. One person jumps out, and he runs over, and I stopped, and he jumps in, and I said, "We're going to go to that house," because I could see it. We're going to go to that house right there and call 911. He said, "My grandma lives in the next house." I said, "Drop me off at my grandma." So we drove over there. I said, "You going to call 911? He said, "Yeah." I figured he wouldn't, because as soon as I let him off, he ran past his grandma's and he kept going. So I went to my friends, and I ran in, and I said, I was dialing 911, told them the accident and where it happened and what road we're on. And I hung up and I said, "Here's your money. We got to go over there because there's a person still in that car." I said, 2 bodies in the ditch. So I think they're dead. And he froze. And he said, "What happened?" So he I had to walk it through it to him again. And he didn't want to go. And I didn't realize that his own son lost his life in a rollover.
Oh.
And he ended up upside down. They didn't have the jaws of life to get him up. So he was crushed. And so I keep thinking about that. If I would have been a minute or 2 earlier, I would have
coming out of the road.
I would have went head on with that vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why he's still use the word.
Okay, so Gerald, can you talk to us about this piece here?
This is a kicking bird, and I was trying to get away from the portrait like everybody else does. They all do the same thing, and you can always find a sitting bull, and it's always the same one, and everybody draws and paints it the same way. So this is just giving it a different look, giving it a different voice, or giving it making it different so that it's not all the same cookie cutter kind of thing. And getting back into South Dakota trying to be involved in Native art, trying to do something Native. And this is kind of what I came up with. And
kind of a compromise.
compromise, yeah. And people really look at this and they say, well, that looks good, but if you would have done it this way like everybody else does.
Well, it's very, you recognize Kicking Bird. He's such a famous personage. I mean, it's very recognizable. And I love what you did with the red and green kind of shapes there too.
Using the complementary colors.
Yeah, and the turquoise. That's neat patterning, neat texture. So how about this drawing here?
Living in Washington, D.C., you get to see the homeless.
Mm.
And as you're walking down the street, they're using the bathroom, they're going into the trash can for food, sleeping. And this was an assignment that I had for my students. And we drew the same face, and then we put something different in the reflection in the glasses. They could choose whatever they want to. So I started this one day in class, and by the end of the 2 weeks that we did this, this is what I came up with.
It's wonderful. You really feel the despair, and you get that feeling that you're looking through those reflective glasses and the perspective and all the different highlights that you did too. It was a great assignment.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for talking with me today.
You're welcome.